Hi, welcome back. We are painting a little painting of some geraniums today. I'm Karen Alari, and this is part 2 of Garden Corner. Here's my palette again, all the different paint colors I use in case you're interested. And here's the reference photo of these beautiful geraniums in the sunlight. We finished our blocking in the first part, and we got started on doing our detail in our painting. We put in some medium dull greens as a background for our foliage. And now I'm going back with some darks. It's a very, very pretty purple dark to just see where I'm going to put those darks in my flowers. I'm going to be focusing on my focal point flower, which is this little flower in the left-hand bottom corner. And this is the flower I want to put the most detail on. And I don't always start with that in a painting. I kind of vary it. Sometimes I bring all the detail up throughout the painting at the same time and then finish my focal point by going a little bit further in the detail in that area. But today I decided to go ahead and just work on this flower and get it where I wanted it to be, and then I'll go on with the rest of the flowers in the painting. What I'm trying to do is recreate these beautiful vivid reddish purple magenta colors that were in this flower. I want to bring some detail to this flower, but I'm not thinking about drawing an exact shape. I'm thinking about finding the exact color and the exact value and putting that color and the right value down in the right place. And that's what gives us our feeling of realism. Value is so important in realism, in making something look as real as we want to make it look. I don't want this to be photographic, but I want it to be very clearly a geranium. So I'm just going to start going back and forth with these shapes of colors. And my reference photo is on a computer monitor next to me. As opposed to printing it out in a photograph, I find just putting it up on the computer monitor to be more helpful. I can actually zoom in areas I'm working on if I want to, and I don't lose some of the detail by printing it onto photo paper and lose the detail, some of the detail that way. So as you can see, I keep glancing at my monitor. I squint at the monitor to get the shapes. I'm seeing a color, I look at the monitor, I find a color that is in that flower, and then I go find where in the flower that particular color is going to be. There's not much more to describe with this process because it's just a matter of going back and forth, putting in a few lights, putting in a few darks. Again, struggling with trying to keep those brilliant colors, but get some of the areas lighter. One thing that I often have to end up doing if I have a painting that I'm trying to keep very colorful and bright, like I am with this one, is the whole painting tends to end up in a darker key. You know, that all the darks are darker and all the lights are down a little bit in order to not have to have so much white in the paint, which makes the color more dull. These little tiny blossoms here have a tiny center that's almost blue, and so I'm working on trying to find that bluish gray color that's going to just define that little bit. I'm not trying to, again, draw it out. I'm just trying to find the shapes of color. I still hold my brush fairly loosely, And I tend to use the side of my brush a lot, so I just lay that color in there and roll my brush. I'm thinking about edges a lot as I do this. You want to get some hard edges, some very distinct edges, which again will bring focus to the focal point in your painting, to have some hard edges, but you don't want them all to be hard, or your flower will end up looking very graphic, like a cutout or a cartoon or something of that nature. So I don't want to do that. So I'll oftentimes lay my brush down and create one hard edge with the side of the brush, and then I pull my brush away from the canvas to leave the other edge soft or more blended. Again, we're working with acrylic paints, which are different than oil paints in the sense that you don't have much time to go back in and blend while you're doing this. So I'm laying down a color, blending quickly one edge of it, and leaving a hard edge wherever I see a hard edge in the photograph, which is oftentimes going to be a petal edge, and it's just going to define that little shape of the petal. And then I'm coming back in again with that dulled blue-green, coming around the flower and defining the shape of those little blossom shapes by coming with the background color and painting the negative shape, painting around the flower. And also with this darker dull green to make the bright colors stand out even more. So as you can see, I started to define that shape with the dark blue, and now I'm looking to the interior of the flower, just wherever I see the background foliage peeking through a little bit. Of course, as you lay in those dark areas are going to recede more. I'm finding the shape and the form of the flower by doing that. See, I added a little bit of Alizarin Crimson to that green to make it darker and less green. And now I'm coming in and mixing a very dark black. I mix my darkest dark with Pthalo Blue, Alizarin Crimson, and Quinacridone Gold. It makes a very dark, fairly transparent dark. You don't want your darks to get too dull. You want to try to keep them as transparent as you can. Coming back in with some of that bluish gray color to define some of my edges and give more form to the flower shapes. I also thought I would do this more detailed flower first, so I can use that flower to decide how much detail I'm going to put in the other flowers, because as the eye moves away from my focal point, I'm going to have less and less detail and more of an impressionistic look. So once I define the level of detail that I want in my focal point flower, I know that I'm not going to put any more detail in any other area of my painting. It's the same way with color. I'm also, not going to be any more chromatic anywhere else in the painting. And I'm also going to have my darkest darks and my lightest lights right around my focal point. As I looked at this flower, it's just amazing as you study photographs to paint. I think that's one of the things I love about painting is you never really know a flower or anything, a tree or a rock. You never really understand it until you try to paint it. And when you do paint it, it just is such an adventure of discovery to see what colors are really in there, and to take, we have, our brains want to say, oh, You know, a flower is red, the sky is blue, the tree is green. But when you look as an artist, you're looking at what is really there, what are you really seeing, and it's something that you develop over time, and it doesn't necessarily come naturally. That's not the way our brains have been taught to work in order to get by. In society, we've been taught to identify things. Okay, this is a flower, by categorizing it and generalizing it. So we have to, if we want to improve our painting, learn to turn that brain off, that part of the brain that's going to generalize things and categorize things, and instead look with fresh eyes as if you've never seen this before. And then you can really see what colors are in there and get to know that item, that thing that you're painting in a way that you really don't otherwise. So I love that about painting, and it's a real way to slow down and appreciate nature and appreciate life, and brings a lot of joy into my life. Working on this shadowed area, and as I mentioned before, I can get some very vivid, almost pure tube color in this area because it's darker, and so I'm putting some very vivid magentas, some vivid purples in that area. Coming back with the very light color, trying to find where I'm going to have these highlights. You don't want to go over the top with a lot of highlights, and you don't want to end up with a lot of separate little spotty highlights here and there, like little polka dots, because that doesn't look realistic either. One thing I'm doing as I lay in these little petal shapes, I'm coming back, rinsing my brush, and you have a little bit of time where you can rinse your brush, get some clear water on it, kind of run it against your paper towel so it's not too wet, and then you can soften up one edge or whichever edge you want by using the water. So that's kind of a process I do. I'll lay in that lighter color where I see it on my reference photo, catching the edges of the flower petals, and then once I get a few of those laid in, I'll stop and come back with my brush and just some water and soften those edges. Again, I'm not looking for that graphic look in this painting. I want it to have a little bit more of a natural look to it. So to do that, you need to soften those edges. It's also important when you put in one color, you need to add a little bit of that color here and there. You can't have a color that's just in one single spot. Doesn't look very natural. All right, so that's the end of part 2, and thank you for joining me today. You can see me online, karenalari.com, or you can stop by my Etsy shop. Thanks for joining me, and I hope you join me for part 3.